September 8, 2025. Ukraine's Donetsk front. Before dawn, the ground shook as 20 tanks, 12 armored vehicles, and 600 North Korean soldiers launched their largest attack yet. They believed their overwhelming numbers would crush the Ukrainian defenses in a single blow. But instead of a breakthrough, what followed was a nightmare. Hundreds of drones were swarmed, mines exploded under advancing armor, and Ukrainian artillery rained down with terrifying precision. Within hours, the entire enemy formation had been reduced to rubble. More than 350 soldiers were killed, 200 wounded, and more than 25 armored vehicles destroyed. This was more than a failed attack. It was a disaster so comprehensive that it exposed the futility of mass armor in modern warfare. The battlefield that day proved a cruel truth. Against dense defense and relentless precision, steel and numbers are nothing. The most proud attack of North Korea ended in a sea of fire. How could Ukraine defeat this attack of North Korea when they are still struggling to defend against the crazy attack of Russia? September 8, 2025. In the gray pre-dawn hours over the Donetsk front, the silence was broken by the grinding tracks of heavy armor. This was not a small probing raid. North Korea, fighting shoulder to shoulder with Russian forces, had committed to its largest offensive yet on Ukrainian soil. More than 25 armored vehicles rolled forward, aging but modified T-62s and T-72s, 6 armored personnel carriers, and several BMP infantry carriers. The column stretched across the horizon, steel and firepower advancing under cover of darkness. But they did not come blindly. At the head of the formation, the North Korean commanders pushed forward a single MTLB, a thinly armored reconnaissance vehicle, to test Ukrainian defenses. It was bait, meant to draw fire, to force the defenders to reveal their positions. High above, Ukrainian eyes were already watching. Drone operators tracking every move knew what this meant. One vehicle never comes alone. Where there is one, there is always a brigade. The operators quickly armed their FPV drones and prepared to strike. The first attack came fast. An FPV drone screamed toward the MTLB, detonating against its metal shield. The vehicle staggered but kept moving. A second strike followed, then a third. By the time the smoke cleared, more than 15 drones had already been expended, and still the machine crawled forward. It took over 20 direct drone hits before the MTLB finally stopped dead in its tracks. To the Ukrainian soldiers, this was a chilling signal. If one expendable vehicle required that much effort to destroy, what would happen when the entire armored column pressed in? The storm from the north had only just begun. If you were a commander watching your vehicles vanish one by one, would you push forward, retreat, or surrender? The fall of the MTLB was only the beginning. Hidden deep in their positions, Ukrainian soldiers watched as the North Korean commanders escalated. The second wave roared forward, 2 T-72 tanks and 1 armored personnel carrier. Their engines thundered through the ruins of a shattered village, but within seconds, disaster struck. The lead tank detonated a buried anti-tank mine. The explosion ripped apart nearly 800 pounds of steel, throwing its 46-ton frame to the side. The second tank braked hard to assist, but it was already too late. Above them, a swarm of 10 FPV drones dived in unison. The first struck the turret, the next ripped into the engine block, and by the fifth hit, the tank was burning uncontrollably. The APC pressed forward desperately, only to be slammed from the front by another drone carrying a warhead powerful enough to pierce 200 millimeters of armor. Within minutes, all 3 vehicles were reduced to smoking wreckage. Survivors scrambled into the open, but Ukrainian operators switched to thermal view. Every heat signature became a target. More than 25 soldiers were cut down before they could reach cover. Refusing to accept defeat, Pyongyang launched a third wave. 12 soldiers on quad bikes, each carrying heavy machine guns. Racing across open fields at nearly 50 miles per hour, they hoped speed would save them. Instead, Ukrainian drones released cluster bomblets that tore through the formation. The field was ripped apart by over 100 separate explosions. In less than 4 minutes, every bike was destroyed, and not a single rider survived. Still, the assault pressed on. A fourth wave came. 2 more tanks and 1 APC. The lead tank hit another mine but kept grinding forward on mangled tracks. The APC wasn't so fortunate. 7 FPV drones struck it in rapid succession, triggering an explosion so powerful it hurled debris more than 200 feet into the air. The tank crews, shaken and bleeding, abandoned their machines and ran into the tree line. But Ukrainian drones pursued them like predators. One by one, fireballs lit up the forest edge. By dawn, North Korea had already lost over 150 troops and at least 8 armored vehicles, a staggering cost for only a few kilometers of advance. What was intended as a show of power had collapsed into a massacre. And yet, Ukraine's commanders knew this storm was still building. The true test was yet to come. Your likes and shares help us reveal the truth of modern warfare. Stand with us by supporting this channel. By midday on September 8th, the North Koreans had already lost over 150 soldiers and 8 armored vehicles. But Ukraine's commanders knew the decisive blow was still ahead. Reconnaissance drones pinpointed the main enemy convoy hidden behind the tree line. A massive formation of 10 T-72 tanks, 6 older T-62S, 8 APCS, 5 BMP infantry carriers, and at least 400 troops preparing to advance. Left unchecked, this could smash through Ukrainian defenses. The order was given: unleash the swarm. Moments later, Ukrainian drone operators activated what was described as one of the largest drone waves of the war. More than 350 drones of every class filled the air: FPV kamikazes, long-range strike drones, and the heavy Baba Yaga bombers carrying 30-pound charges. The buzzing of engines grew so loud, it was said to sound like a swarm of locusts crossing the sky. The convoy panicked. Tanks gunned their engines, APCS scattered, soldiers leapt from vehicles. But there was no escape. The first salvo of 20 drones struck the lead T-72, detonating 4 tons of ammunition inside. The blast tore the turret from the hull and hurled it nearly 200 feet away. Seconds later, another drone pierced the fuel tanks of an APC convoy. 9,800 liters of diesel ignited, sending a fireball into the air so hot it melted nearby trees. Thermal drones hunted the fleeing infantry. Every heat signature lit up as a target. In less than 5 minutes, more than 70 soldiers were eliminated in open fields. A BMP tried to provide cover fire, but 6 FPV drones slammed into it in succession, causing an explosion so powerful debris was scattered over half a kilometer. The climax came when Baba Yaga bombers struck the rear of the formation, where fuel trucks and supply carriers were hiding. The result was catastrophic. At least 5 supply vehicles erupted in simultaneous blasts, each equivalent to 300 pounds of TNT, creating shockwaves that rattled windows in villages miles away. In under 20 minutes, the entire convoy was annihilated. Over 20 armored vehicles, hundreds of tons of equipment, and more than 200 North Korean troops were lost. What was meant to be Pyongyang's spearhead had instead become an inferno of twisted steel and burning wreckage. The battlefield no longer belonged to tanks or infantry. It belonged to the drones, an invisible army that had turned one of the largest offensives of the war into a complete disaster. The battle is far from over. What comes next is one of the most ruthless ambushes of the war. Keep watching to witness it unfold. Even after the convoy's annihilation, Pyongyang's commanders were not ready to admit defeat. Believing Ukraine's drone reserves exhausted, they dispatched yet another armored push. 4 T-72 tanks, 2 aging T-62S, and 3 BMP infantry carriers, with more than 180 troops riding inside and alongside. Their objective was simple: force a breach through the battered tree line and seize a road junction critical for resupply. But waiting in the shadows were 2 Ukrainian tanks, camouflaged beneath netting and rubble, guided by a circling reconnaissance drone. Every movement of the North Korean armor was tracked in real time, down to the exact meter. The Ukrainians held their fire, waiting until the enemy had advanced deep into the kill zone. The first shot came with devastating precision. A 125mm shell slammed into the lead T-72, igniting its ammunition and blasting the turret clean off, hurling 20 tons of steel nearly 100 feet into the air. Chaos rippled down the column. Before crews could react, the second Ukrainian round struck a BMP, killing more than 20 soldiers inside in a single instant. Panic set in. The surviving tanks fired wildly into the tree line, launching more than a dozen shells in blind retaliation. None hit their mark. Meanwhile, Ukrainian FPV drones swooped down, slamming into the exposed flanks of two more BMPs. Both vehicles exploded, scattering burning debris across the road. In desperation, North Korean infantry deployed 3 anti-tank guided missile teams. The first missile streaked across the field only to smash harmlessly into a ruined wall. The second veered off course and exploded in an empty field. The third struck a tree trunk and detonated uselessly. 3 teams, 3 launches, 0 hits. Each miss drove morale deeper into collapse. Abandoning their machines, crews scrambled for cover. More than 60 soldiers poured into the ruins of a nearby village, but UAV operators hunted them relentlessly. One drone strike collapsed an entire house, burying 8 men inside. Another drone chased a fleeing squad into the open, eliminating them one by one. By the end of the ambush, 6 armored vehicles were destroyed, over 100 troops killed or wounded, and the rest scattered into the countryside. What was meant to be a decisive push had turned into a massacre. For the North Koreans, the tree line became a death trap. For Ukraine, it was proof once again that technology, precision, and patience could shatter even the heaviest steel. And as smoke curled above the battlefield, the message was unmistakable. No amount of armor could save an army blind to the skies. When the smoke finally cleared on September 8th, the full scale of the disaster came into focus. In less than 24 hours, North Korea had thrown over 600 troops, 20 tanks, 12 APCs, and nearly a dozen BMP carriers into the assault. The result was catastrophic. More than 350 soldiers killed, 200 wounded, and at least 25 armored vehicles reduced to burning wreckage. Entire battalions were wiped out before they could fire a meaningful shot. The reason was not luck. It was design. Ukraine's defenses had become a deadly machine built on 3 layers. The first was the drone screen. Hundreds of FPV kamikazes and heavy bombers that scouted, disoriented, and shattered the spearhead of every column. The second was artillery and HIMARS, striking stalled convoys with explosive power equivalent to several tons of TNT per salvo, tearing through fuel and ammunition carriers. The third was ground firepower, Bradleys, tanks, and ambush teams, finishing off what remained. Added to this were dense belts of mines, each capable of immobilizing a 40-ton tank with a single blast. Every element worked together. If a tank advanced too quickly, it struck a mine. If it slowed, drones swarmed overhead. If it stopped to fight, artillery locked on within minutes. Advance meant destruction, retreat meant being hunted, and standing still was suicide. For North Korea, this was more than a failed offensive. It was a humiliation. Their attempt to prove power had instead exposed weakness, showing the world that outdated armor and sheer numbers meant nothing against layered defenses and modern precision warfare. For Ukraine, it was validation. A smaller nation, outnumbered and outgunned, had once again proven that strategy, technology, and resilience could outweigh brute force. On September 8th, the battlefield itself told the story. The age of mass tank offensives was over. The future belonged to those who adapted, and Ukraine had just rewritten the rules of war. September 8th, 2025 will be remembered not as a triumph of North Korean armor, but as one of its darkest defeats. In a single day, what began as an ambitious offensive collapsed into a nightmare of fire and steel. More than 350 soldiers killed, 200 wounded, and over 25 armored vehicles destroyed. Losses so staggering that entire battalions ceased to exist. The battlefield was littered with the twisted remains of tanks, APCS, and BMPS, silent monuments to a strategy that belonged to another century. Ukraine's layered defense proved decisive. Drones became the eyes, ears, and executioners. Artillery and HIMARS delivered devastating barrages, tearing apart stalled convoys. Mines immobilized heavy armor, while tanks and Bradley crews struck with precision. Each layer reinforced the other, leaving North Korean forces with no safe options. Advance meant destruction, retreat meant pursuit, and standing still meant certain death. The lesson is undeniable. In modern war, numbers alone cannot guarantee victory. Technology, coordination, and adaptability now weigh heavier than sheer mass. Ukraine has transformed itself into a proving ground where the old logic of armored dominance dies and a new doctrine of precision warfare rises. For the soldiers on the ground, it was not just a military victory, it was survival. For the world watching, it was proof that determination and innovation can overcome even the most relentless assaults. And for North Korea, it was a warning. Outdated tactics, no matter how heavily armed, will only lead to disaster. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who care about the truth of modern warfare. Your support keeps us going and helps bring these untold stories to light.